And
This meeting is being recorded.
okay, got it. All right. If you got the message that it's being recorded, just say got it and you're good. Okay.
Got it.
Got it. Got
All
it.
right. Do we have any members of the public on this meeting? Alan, do you see
I do
anybody
not
else?
see any members. It's just, I will tell you who I have: myself, Jerry, Russell, Mary, Ken.
Yeah, I see the gallery. I got it.
Sorry.
Okay, we're good. All right, first order of business I'd like to say is that we will table our March 28th regular meeting minutes until our next meeting, all right? And this is a special meeting, so we have items on the agenda, and these are the only items on the agenda that will be discussed in this meeting. We have our guests. We have point one architects who are here to clarify things if we need them. And I'd like a motion, please, to take old business and replace it under new business. And I want to go straight to our cost estimate discussion, because we have people in the meeting who may have other obligations later on. Okay, so can I have a motion to take new business right now with the cost estimation, and then take old business, use of space, dining and office only after that discussion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Russell, second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Skip and Russell, all right. All right. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, raise hands, please, so I can see everybody. I gotta take a kind of like a motion roll call. Opposed? Abstained? All right. Motion approved. All right,
Jerry, that was Alan who made the motion and Skip who seconded it.
I'm
That
sorry,
was,
I saw Russell's face.
Russell.
Mary. It was Russell.
Yeah, it was Russell.
Oh, I thought you
Okay.
did it.
No,
All
I
right.
voted aye, but Russell beat me to the punch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we move on? All right, you have been given the latest cost estimate that needs to be approved tonight in order for us to go forward with the Board of Finance tomorrow night. This afternoon, I met with the Board of Selectmen, and not to necessarily get their approval, because I wasn't going to jump the gun for tonight. They understood that we were going to be meeting, but we had a full hour's length discussion about this cost estimate, and they unanimously were supportive of any effort that we are going to make. I don't know who is creating the feedback. You might want to take a look. Okay, and I can tell you what some of their feedback was, and then we can go into what we might need to do. Immediately, they asked how we're going to make money to support this project, how we're going to fundraise. And so we had a discussion basically about the grant that I wrote for with Senator Murphy's support for the direct spending appropriation under the Community Facilities Grant. And that grant was written the day before we got our estimate, so we had to estimate the estimate for the grant, but I put in a grant request through that process for $5,101,000. That grant application asks to exclude certain costs, so that was the closest that we could get to doing that. I did remind them that we're looking hopefully for steep grants if that money becomes available. There are some ARPA funds that have become available through the Department of Aging and Disability Services. And then I said we have just basically started thinking about private fundraising. But right now, the idea of getting this process through the towns and also bonding requests through the state and anything else that we can do on either the state or the local level to make sure this process moves forward will be supplemented by any other money that we can get. Okay, so that was basically that discussion. They were very happy to see that we have made the good faith effort to reduce costs without jeopardizing the integrity of the plan. And on that note, that's basically, I want to open this discussion for this cost estimate to see if anybody has any questions or concerns about what you have in front of you in terms of this estimate. And then I'd like to move forward for a vote. And we will be doing a roll call vote of the voting members when we get to that stage. Mary?
Could I ask a question about the process? So we have a cost estimate based on an existing plan, and then we have grant applications that we don't yet know the status of. And I'm wondering why we're deciding on a final cost and obviously not meeting certain needs we need to meet in advance of knowing whether we get these grant funds, because it seems like if we got the grant funds, we would be able to fund a more complete building. And so my question is about the process of, the order in which we put the steps.
Okay, let me explain to you what the grant process is that we're involved in right now. On the federal level, that grant application became known to us just a few days before the cost estimate came in. And the scramble was to get that application in because the deadline was the day before we got our estimate on the federal level. Now, the federal fiscal year is October 1st, and we won't have knowledge of whether we've been approved for this or not until November or December of this year. They understood that. I think what we have to make sure that we decide is that what money we ask for is primarily the obligation of the two towns to fund first. Any monies that we get coming in to supplement that or to offset the costs, we're going to go after everything we can go after. But they also understood that it's a what if. If we don't get the grant, we still need to have approval of the towns and approval of the voters to go forward. Does that make sense to everybody? Alan?
That makes sense to me, but I would also emphasize that you can't apply for a grant if you don't have a plan.
Yeah.
So this is the forward. To me, the process started 2 years ago with a problem statement and feedback sessions and all kinds of whiteboarding and stack ranking different options, different features, and then option 1, option 2, which led to a rough estimate that the towns gave their, I would say, blessing to. It wasn't a budget approval except for the 0.1 fees for this year. And now what the towns have to approve is the cost of the project. And the cost of the project is based upon these estimates. And concurrent with that, with those kinds of details in hand, we have the information it takes to make grant applications. If we were to make grant applications without a project, those would more than likely fall flat. They're asking in the grant application what you're spending the money on, what you're doing, or that type of thing. And then I think all throughout the process, we'll walk in one day and look at the walls and say, I didn't know that's the yellow you meant. I thought you meant that yellow. So all throughout the process as we're building this thing, there's going to be give and take every place along the way. But we certainly have a fully vetted and costed out design. And I think it's to our advantage that we actually have this much knowledge about a grant that would be 55% of the construction costs. That exceeded our expectations at the moment. We didn't even think we would have that much to hope for this early on. So I think it's almost like being a little bit ahead, the fact that we made an application for that amount of money.
And the application process is just application right now for the grant. And what's going to happen is there's going to be feedback and conversations with Senator Murphy's office ongoing. And if we're approved, then there's a whole other layer through the state of Connecticut that you have to abide by in order to actually implement the grant. So this is just the beginning of a process that they understood at the Board of Selectmen because other people have put in for grants like this.
So if we're gonna give them the full cost to the town.
Right.
And then we have to get town approval, and then do we go get the grants if we can? Is that the way it works?
Yeah.
So we have
And
to get-
grants or any other money that we can raise. Because that's what we pledged we would do. But it's also meeting the fiscal budgeting processes of both towns in order to keep this project going.
Okay,
Which is quite similar to what happened last year for a much smaller amount of money, about $280,000. But we did the public information session, if you recall, and in that session, I think we finalized or galvanized the amount of support for this project. And then the two towns put in the $280,000 of cost for this year's work. And now we're right at the same point in time. Our need is to submit to the towns a budget amount that they could stick in their budgets and get approved by their individual town processes, so that we have, the authorization to spend that kind of money. And they know that the grants are pending, or this particular grant. This grant would pay 55% of $5.1 million if we got it in full. That would reduce our cost to our two towns by $2.8 million, which means the two towns would be splitting a bill that's $2.8 million less. And I don't think that this committee should think of that $2.8 million as another $2.8 million to spend. It's a way to make the cost of this renovation net to the towns. They're looking.
so when we get approval from the the town hall, then it has to go to a town meeting before we can move on?
I would say
Okay,
it's slightly different.
Can I answer that? Because that came up at the meeting, at the Board of Selectmen meeting. They have to decide how they're going to let the voters vote on this. Okay, each town will do whatever they want to do with their budget process. And I asked the question, well, actually, Tim brought up the idea that it still has to go to the voters, and they haven't decided in the line whether it's going to go to a town meeting or to a separate referendum from the school referendum. Okay. And it's the timing of that they have to figure out. And that's not what we do. We just have to wait till they decide what they want to do. When we did the architectural fees, that was done through a town meeting. And it had unanimous support at the town meeting. So I'm just asked them to please let us know what they want to do and when they want to do it, because we're going to do the same thing we did last time. We're going to have a public forum, and we're going to get the word out about what we're doing.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any comment they'd like to make? And then I can move into something that they specifically wanted to talk about.
I would, for the benefit of the building committee, I mean, everybody's received the paper, which shows the total anticipated project cost, the $5.5 million. And a piece of that was already funded this year, about $281,000. So the net to be approved is the $5,263,000, and that would get split between the two towns. And we should understand that within those numbers are certain amounts of contingencies to take into account some more price escalation or inflation between now and when we start building this thing, and some contingencies for unknowns and oopsies And those contingencies are baked in at industry standard percentages. There's 4.5% built into the cost of construction and another 5% built in after the cost of construction. So that gives us a total of something like $600,000 of wiggle room for refinements, better estimates, changes in cost of materials, realizing that the design on paper doesn't work once you go to actually lay it out and have to change something. So I emphasize all that, Jerry, so everybody understands that what we're doing here is attempting to create an estimate that we as a building committee can stick to, because the towns themselves don't have authorization to spend more than what is in their budget, and we can't spend more than what they have put in their budget.
Okay. Mary, does that help?
I'm worried when I see the owner's contingency under additional costs, when I see that reduced. I realize that you have contingency built into the basic construction line item, but with costs rising as fast as they have been, I'd like to ask our architects and Russell and Ken, is that safe to be doing that?
Before that's responded to, maybe this is being misread, so I just want to clarify something, Mary. The owner's contingency was increased by $37,000 from the prior estimate. It's at $237,000. It was at $200,000, and we hardly had any when we started this a year ago. And that $237,000 is at a industry standard 5%. And part of why it moved is because this number moved. So when this number moved up, the cost of the work from 4.5 to 4.7, this increased. And within the 4,750,000, I note that there's also 362,000 of escalations and contingencies within that number. So we have a very fair 362 plus 237, 600,000 worth of contingencies. So I just want to be sure that you read the math correctly as you put the question to point one about the sufficiency or reasonableness of those.
Yeah,
so-
I appreciate the explanation, and I did notice that. I'm glad it's been increased. And what I want to hear from our construction professionals is this a reasonable amount for doing construction in the next 2 years? Or do we need to be prepared for, because there's nothing reasonable about the cost escalation we've been experiencing. It's unprecedented for, recent times. So I want to hear from professionals that we're doing a sensible thing here.
Okay, well, all right. Who wants to talk first? Russell, Greg, Ken? Who? Raise your hand. Who wants to be first?
I'll get weigh in, and then I'll have Greg and Ken weigh in. But yeah, I mean, I think the different contingencies. So there's and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong. There's an escalation contingency and an estimating contingency in that's carried, and those are to pick up any cost changes in price increases between now and bid day. So once we get to bid day, those contingencies go away. And if there's an anticipated cost increase, that's what that contingency is. It's a guess based on where the market is now, but that's what those are for. The 5% contingency is for anything that happens after we begin construction.
Right.
That's less likely to be cost-driven issues. I mean, cost increases, but we discover there's something buried in the site that no one knew, or something, something that's not expected, or something under the foundation that we didn't know about. And then we have those dollars to pick that up. And that's what the contingency is for that. And usually it's between 5 and 7.5 for new and renovation. I think the expectation is that we know enough about our building that 5% is a safe number. So
Okay,
Greg, Ken, you guys want to weigh in? Kelsey?
Do you agree with that? And I don't know who's still getting some feedback, so you might want to check your devices, please.
All right, guys, can you hear me?
Ken?
Yes, it's Ken. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what Russell said, he's correct. All right. And, looking at it, 5%, Mary, the 5% is what we have to have when we start construction. That's what we need for those, those unforeseen items that we find during construction. So, I feel comfortable with that, especially with our building that we have. And, with point one, knowing that they're carrying some money for escalation, Mary, if I could tell you what's going to happen next year, I wouldn't be sitting here. So I feel comfortable with the numbers that they have.
Thank you.
Okay, does that answer your question or do you need some more? Mary?
No, those are good answers. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Now, the question I have is, we're always talking about increases, and this building is probably going to not start for 18 months. What if the price of products and stuff goes down? How does that work?
Good question.
We save money.
Yeah.
We save money.
Yeah.
But
that-
normally do they just leave it the way it is, or do, if there are truly savings, do they come back to us and get, hey, we saved $50,000 on this or whatever?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
We go through the bidding
Yeah.
process, we'll be
Right.
seeing what is being proposed for the prices. If at those times, those bids are coming in lower than what we had estimated, we're gonna take the lower bid. And the next time we get an update of the cost of the project, God willing, it's actually $25,000 less than we had asked for. We'll keep track of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The ideal thing
I
is,
understand it.
yeah, the ideal thing is that we have higher budget prices all the way up to bid day, and then bid prices are lower. It almost never happens, but I've seen it happen. It happened in 2008 and 2009. That was the only time I saw that happen, where the market fell and
Fingers crossed.
we were getting prices 20% less. But that's the only time in my 30-year career that I've seen that happen.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you. I
And we
appreciate
don't
the
want that. We
explanation.
don't want that to have happen again, because that means we're in a recession. So a
Yeah.
bad recession. So
Right.
But-
And so far, the Board of Selectmen were very interested and grateful that we were able to effectively reduce costs to the tune of $214,978.64 so far. Okay, which they were very impressed with, frankly, that we made the good faith effort without degrading the integrity of the plan. Okay. So is there anything else? Does anybody else have a concern? Do you need to take some turns here? I can tell you one thing that did have lengthy discussion, and that was they asked about what the most expensive things were on the menu here. And the fire suppression system came up. And we basically went through an exercise at the Board of Selectmen, and we've actually had this discussion off and on about a cost-benefit analysis, basically, of the suppression system versus taking another approach to fireproofing the building. And I brought a diagram in to show them what if. The discussion that we had with Dave Roberts the other day with point one about what if we reduce the occupancy load by reclassifying some of the spaces, and then taking a look at the corridor system and fireproofing that, if that would be a viable option. The only problem is it's just an option that no one in the town hall is willing to sign off on at this point. Without seeing a brand new plan, if we do the corridor fireproofing instead of keeping the suppression system. We talked about at the Board of Selectmen, what would it mean to keeping the fire suppression system for insurance rates? Would that help with keeping a lower insurance rate possibly? We talked about safety, about the fact that it may only be a one-story building, but you still, if fire breaks out and you have a number of people in the building who are older and may not be able to egress as quickly as other people, that could be a problem. We talked about the cost to benefit analysis of maintaining a fire suppression system over time, which could be not cheap, but have to be done. So my question to you, and it sort of changed my mind a little bit by walking through this exercise. Point one would have to go back and kind of redesign that corridor in order to make it fireproofed if we decided to go that route. But my concern was making it fireproof might change the way it looks, might change the integrity of the design as we have now, and change the light in that corridor. Okay. My thinking personally at this stage is we keep the fire suppression system, because we're looking at possibly only a possibility of saving about $145,000 by going the other way with fireproofing the corridor. And frankly, $145,000 isn't a heck of a lot of money if we have a system that in 10 to 15 years is still viable. If we don't have a fire suppression system, and 10 to 15 to 20 years from now, we need to add more space. And frankly, I won't be alive to see that, but you know, it could happen. We would have to have a fire suppression system, because we were only able to whittle down the occupancy to 299 on paper at this point. Okay, so I want to open that up for a discussion, because that's a big part of the budget. Anybody else have feelings about that? Concerns?
Well, I guess I was the one that found out about the idea that we might do that. But after explaining where you did just now and earlier today, I think we need to go with it.
With
I
what?
think
The
the
fire
big concern would be at least to understand about what it costs to maintain that once it's in place.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else? How do you feel about one or the other?
I think an element of this, based on what I know, is that we're really guessing how much money could be saved. The fire suppression, you see it as a line item just before the cost of the work subtotal. It's $388,000. That's an all-in number that includes the effects of the site work, you know, trenching, the house, electrical, everything related to it. It's a big ticket item, and it shocked us. A year ago, we thought $140,000 would be enough money for that fire sprinkler system. So first of all, it's a huge amount of money. But if we don't have it, we don't know enough what the cost would really be to have sufficient fire rating, to raise the fire rating on so many building components. And it seems like if we have to spend so much of that 388 back to make up for the fact that the fire suppression system isn't there, then at what point is it just better to spend the rest of the money and have the fire suppression system? So I tend to come down on the side of having it in there, especially for the amount that we submit to the towns to budget. Because if over time, a hard study of the use, it's not re-rating the roof, but the actual intended use of the different spaces really does come down to a much lower number. And if the amount that we could save comes down to a much higher number than 145,000, we could always make a decision as a committee. We're more tempted to go in that direction. But if we budgeted the low amount, we can't go the other way once we're locked into our budget. So for those reasons, and then the last one, which is, I suppose it's really better that you've built a system with the fire suppression as opposed to built an argument as to why you don't need it, right? From a public safety and well-being point of view. So I think it would be different if it was a 50-person building and we're building a fire suppression for 300 plus, but we're so close to the numbers. So for those reasons, as tempting as it is for the accountant to want to find ways for us to save dollars, I don't think that's the way to budget. I think we should budget at the higher amount until proven otherwise that we shouldn't put in that whole system.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say about that?
I agree that with safety, we should start our budget at the high point, and then the best scenario we could hope for is to find out that we don't need that high point, that we need less. But
You're on TV.
you know, Alan's point is very valid. I found this in all my public work. You can't increase it after you've said you only need this much. And secondly, we have to sell this building to the public, and we can't sell a building that has less than premium safety measures. So
But, yeah, you're right. You're right. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else?
I think we should definitely keep it for the minimal value extra in cost. I think it's a huge value in every other piece. But I do want to note that this is the fork in the road. So once we go down this path, pulling it out is not an easy thing. So I think we have to all know this is the decision, and we go on. Because as Greg and Rick and Kelsey already said, you know, there's this option, or we have to do all this other stuff, that redesign requirements. This isn't one of those things that's an easy alternate. So I mean, I think this is the right course. It's expensive relative to other sprinkler systems, but it's because we live in a small town and we don't have public water like that. And that's, you know, we have extra costs when you're off the grid.
Yeah, and it's not a
but-
very simple system either to put into
No.
our building even, so, yeah.
Right. But this is the time to do it because we're doing such major renovations that everything's being opened up. So it's a lot easier. If in 10 or 15 years they want to increase the building by a small amount, it would be a major thing to put a sprinkler system in the building we're building today, that portion. So I think it's smart to just allow some flexibility for future changes. So.
Okay. Great. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Okay. Is there anything else on this estimate that you have a question about that we can help with? Cool. I did.
I have a question about the process with line items, and it's really important that as we get into this and we find costs exceeding what we have budgeted, that we not use certain other line items that come later in the process to fund the earlier items, and then find ourselves without any money for security or for FF&E or for steps that come later in the process. So I'm wondering, in the accountability during construction, how do you manage it when, well, first of all, who is going to be managing our budget during construction? And secondly, what do you do when budget items or steps in the process exceed what you have budgeted for them?
Okay. I don't know who's going to be project manager for this, whether it's somebody's going to be hired. I do know, and Greg Nucci, you can back us up. We had discussions with the architects when we contracted with them to make sure that they are available through the end of construction. Okay, so that's one good point of reference for somebody who would be on site. But in terms of like a clerk of the works or a project manager, I don't know at what stage we need to get involved with that. Can somebody help us with that? Mary and me too, okay?
So just to let you know kind of where we are and how we got to a phase called design development, which we've developed the drawings to a pretty high level to get our cost estimate that we have, that everyone's talking about today. So the next step is for us to do the construction documents, which they're all the project drawings and specifications and legal language and of how this project gets procured. So the likely way it's going to go out is probably going to go out to a public bid because it's public money.
Right.
There are other methods where you can actually hire a construction manager, and then they bid all of the subcontracts. So you're still getting fair bidding process through that. So I don't know that that's been determined yet, but ultimately the general contractor or the low bidder or the construction manager through some kind of an interview process would then be managing the cost of construction and the construction. The architect's role in that scenario is to be an advisor to the owner and actually make sure that the construction that is being observed by us out there is meeting the intent of the design and the specifications in the contract documents. So there is a built-in system through the architectural contractual relationship with the owner, as well as the owner's relationship with the contractor. It's kind of a checks and balances throughout the construction process. So we would be reviewing payment requisitions from the contractor to make sure that, you know, the costs are aligning with their scheduled value of what they put in their estimate in their bid. So it's cooked into the system, the management of that. Now, if you decide you want a representative on site, you can do that too. That's typically a clerk of the works or an owner's rep. That usually happens on very large, fast track, complicated projects. And I don't really see it that much on projects of this size, and maybe Russell can chime in on that as well.
And Ken too.
And
yeah.
Ken too, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, go ahead, Ken.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, okay. So, in this type of project, I would be looking at probably going out as a GC bid on this one. The size of it really doesn't gear it towards a CM type. And then possibly looking at, a clerk of the works. And the clerk of the works is, how much we buy them, and their services, whether they're full-time, whether they're part-time, and monitoring that. But getting back to really what Mary's talking about is, looking at the budget. Mary, as soon as we go out, to bid and everything, we'll have the hard numbers. We'll know where our budget stands, and we kind of go with that. And then you have your contingency for those unknowns. And you've gone through enough of these public projects that the easy thing is always to go after the FF&E, and you got to protect that. But that's something that's really a committee type of item in those decisions that are going to be made. It really doesn't matter. The clerk of the works doesn't have that final say. That's all always comes back to us as a committee.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Russell? You're shaking your head up and down.
Yeah, no, I just thought I was in mute, but I was not. No, I agree. I think that we don't probably need a full owner's rep, but if you wanted a clerk of the work, and that's really if the towns wanted to have somebody there doing, documenting certain information. I mean, obviously, if there's a grant involved and things like that, there's a lot more paperwork, and there's a lot more forms you have to fill out. So if the towns decide they don't have anyone on staff to handle that, that probably would be where you'd need a clerk of the works to make sure that that stuff's coming in. Otherwise, it'll fall to you, Jerry.
Oh,
So
thanks a lot, Russ. I made sure my name is not on the grant.
that's good. But that's the one area that anytime there's public money involved, there's a lot of paperwork and oversight that somebody needs to keep track of. So that would be the area, but that would really be after we started construction.
Right, and from my understanding, once we did go out to bid, no matter who comes in as the low bidder, there's still the negotiation of their contract. So
Correct.
that's the opportunity to actually add anything in that we might want to see. When the Mystic Air did their first round of hazmat testing, they suggested that we make sure that we write into any contractor's contract that they can't use any materials that have asbestos or lead in it, right into their contract, because there's still stuff out there. Okay, so we're gonna make sure that everybody is safe in the building process as well. Oh, okay, anybody else? Okay, if there's not, and we still are gonna schedule the second half of the hazmat testing as soon as Tim writes the check for the first half, which he's supposed to be doing soon. Because they actually did put some money in for the rest of this year, till July 1st, to do anything that might come up if we need to do it. Is there anything else that anybody would like to make a comment about on this estimate before I ask for a motion to accept it and approve it, accept it and approve it, and to recommend to the towns?
Well, my problem with it is that it describes a building, but a building that I consider inadequate, and this pertains to the next topic on our agenda, which you don't want me to address now, but it affects how I need to vote on this.
Okay,
Because
well, that's your prerogative. Okay, so, and we will have that discussion. Does anybody else feel that way? All right, can I have a motion to accept this estimate and to recommend it for approval to the two towns? I need a roll call vote on this one. Okay, so I'm going to start with Skip.
Yes,
Oh, do you have the motion on that?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I got a motion. Okay, I'm looking at 5 different pieces of paper, and after spending 2 hours with the Board of Selectmen, I'm fried. Okay, okay, I need a second. I need a motion. Somebody move it.
I make a motion to
Okay,
accept
Skip.
the plans and costs.
Okay, and recommend them to the two towns.
Yes,
Okay, all right. Can I have a second to that, please? Somebody.
I'll second.
Okay, Russell. Okay,
You
Skip.
beat me
and
again.
Russell. Skip and Russell. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, let's start. Skip, one more time.
yes,
Yes. Alan,
Yes?
I vote yes. Russell,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes,
who am I missing for voting member? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a quorum.
well, you're missing me.
Yeah, Mary, I
Right.
know. I'm just going down my list, hon. Okay. What's your vote, please?
I need to vote against the motion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have nobody else. Yeah, DJ is not here either. He had other commitments. So, all right, the vote is, oh, Jerry, let's get all these papers together here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor and 1 negative vote, and we have absent as John Piker and Rick Goulding. Motion is passed. All right. So that takes care of that. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda, and it is under old business, use of space, dining and office only. Okay, at this point. Anything else that might come up, we can do at our next regular meeting in April, but as a special meeting, that's the specific request from Mary, and this is how we're going to proceed. We'll talk about the dining space first. What's your concern, Mary?
My concern is that what was a small dining room on the plan that was stapled to the bulletin board in the senior center for more than a year.
Not more than a year,
it
only a few months.
has become really a passageway, and that space has been used for the fire suppression sprinkler system, for storage closets, for other uses which are necessary, but in positioning them there, that room has been eliminated. So now, in order to serve lunch to the people who eat there on a regular basis, that's going to be have to be done in one of the large multi-purpose rooms, which means that takes it offline for any other uses during that time. So it was something that people made a great point of placing as a priority, and yet it can't be accommodated in this building design. And my other major point is that the offices for all the
No,
staff.
let's stick to the dining, please, first, because we need to put that to bed. Okay.
Okay, so.
Okay,
so
one at a time, please, Mary. Come on, stay, point of order. Okay,
Right, okay, so talking about dining.
Okay.
Elimination of this space means that one of the chief functions of the senior center, something it does daily, is going to be much harder rather than better with this building design. So, and because board members of the senior center and our wonderful volunteer Carol, who runs the kitchen, have all stated that this is a priority, and I've tried to represent these views. That is a major reason why I couldn't vote for this particular building plan with this particular budget. It's not because the rest of it isn't good, and it's not because the budgeting is bad. It's because it lacks a certain essential feature that everyone has told us is important.
okay, all right. I based on what was stated in our last meeting and also discussions that I had both with point one and with Carol subsequent to that meeting, I just want to remind you about what the history was with the feasibility study. At the time we did the feasibility study, the center was struggling to have 15 to 20 people for the congregate lunches on a daily basis, Monday through Friday. Okay, that space was designed initially for two reasons: the possibility of having 15 to 20 people in that space, because we were having trouble getting 15 people, but also if we could possibly have cooking classes. When Ledgelight did their approval process, they would not approve our kitchen to conduct cooking classes. Subsequently, there were requests from our director to have more storage space, and subsequently we needed to put the fire suppression system in because the occupancy rate came over 300. That space in that corner had to be the space that needed to be used. I also was concerned on our March 8th meeting that another senior center was used as an example of a space that we should be taking a look at. So what I did is I contacted the Madison Senior Center the next day and 3 other senior centers, just because that's what I like to do when I do some research, is not just count on one thing. And the Madison Senior Center does not have a dedicated dining space. They have a multi-purpose room. Their dining space accommodates 55 seated and 80 people in chairs for their multi-use. They also have a full commercial kitchen with a chef and staff because they cook their own food. That was one of the places we went to on a field trip. I then contacted the East Lyme community, the East Lyme Senior Center, since that's another space that we visited. They also only use a multi-use room for their congregate lunches, but they are so concerned that their numbers are so low right now in the space that seats 80 people, that they have only averaged 8 people for their congregate lunches, and they will probably discontinue that program. I then contacted Waterford, which is a center that's often referenced as a comparable center. They don't have congregate lunches. They offer lunch, they will schedule a lunch, maybe if somebody wants to schedule something for like an event, like St. Patrick's Day. And they have a room that they have multi-use rooms again. They also share their complex with Parks and Rec. So they have to have multi-use functions. And then I contacted Montville. Montville has a large room they call a great room, which they use as a multi-purpose room, and their luncheons are scheduled in that room as well. I met with Carol afterwards and advised her that on February 22nd, all 3.1 architects and I sat down with Stephanie, and we walked through a scenario that could work for the 3 days a week that the lunches are held in the space of time between 11 and 1 p.m., 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. At that meeting, it was expressed that there was a need to have 5 to 6 tables to seat up to 25 to 30 people, because successfully that program is coming back with like gangbusters. And the use of rectangular tables versus round tables. We walked through the 11 to 1 time frame and said, this is how this could work. You partition off the other spaces during the 11 to 1 with the partitions that are going to be in the building. That space becomes its own space for 11 to 1 p.m. Okay. So that's, and Carol felt that that was reasonable. Her major concern, which I think needed to be expressed as well, and I'm glad that we met, was that she wanted to make sure that the staff that is going to service people during that time frame had an easier access to some space. And she agreed that walking through the corridor into that large space during that period of time when those tables and chairs are going to be set up permanently was fine. And she also felt that I suggested you have a special event or a special luncheon that you want to do, you might be able to get a few cafe tables into the space that's left from the original space. That was fine. And also, if you wanted to do something really special, the sunroom that's going to be done is going to be gorgeous. And all she has to do is work out with Stephanie to plan how to do some kinds of other lunch or meal events. She has no problem with it. Okay.
So with that, a clarifying point for me, with that number of people that she referred to would not have fit in that original space.
No, they wouldn't.
Right? It would have been into that same multi-purpose room.
They would have had to go somewhere else but that's just historically what the problem was with our congregate lunches before the pandemic, is that we hardly met the Estuary Council's contractual request, which was 20. We had trouble with like 15. Sometimes we were down to 12. It was not at the time something that we could project now what our need is. But now I'm so happy that we're up to like 25, 30 people Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's wonderful. And it's a large part due to Carol's efforts.
I mean, this sounds to me like the need is met. It's just met differently than when we looked at option 1 and option 2 scenarios back 6 and 8 months ago. The need itself is met. We would be able to serve the lunches. It's just not in the exact same space that we thought it would be before.
Yeah, and then the other concern that I relayed to her that she didn't have to have is that she concerned if we did block off those, partition off the spaces, that there would be enough light coming in. And that's because she didn't understand that the cupola was going to be able to bring light into that space. Okay, it's not gonna have to be all electric light. Okay, anybody else have any comments about this?
Yeah, I do. So since we last met, I've been doing some more research and I have found something that I thought of in the beginning of this process, and that is that if we have enough money in the FFE, which I'm hoping we will, they have tables that are $850 a piece. However, they're on wheels and they lock down. So when you're not using them, they can be put up like vertically, instead of, and they can be moved over. So because my big concern is not having that space for other things ever, because, the tables are permanently there. So I think this, as long as we make sure we have enough money in the FFE, this might be a way that we'll be able to accommodate the fact that we don't have that small room for lunches, and not lose the space forever because it's always going to have tables on it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Steph. Thank you. Okay.
And Kelsey, Kelsey from Point One is still here, so I saw her nodding a little bit there, paying attention to what you were saying. That would be a real good design. Anything that's flexible and movable and mobile is
I've been working on the furniture aspect of it for about a week now. I'm hoping at the next meeting I can give it to you guys and also give it to the architects as well if they're on board, or it can get sent to them, because I think that as you're going through this process, furniture is going to hopefully be able to solve some of the problems, and as long as we get the right stuff for what we need it for,
I'll come back to a point that Mary made before about sanctity of line items and not robbing from Peter to pay Paul type of thing as we're going through overs and unders. But this is a type of example, Mary, I would say, where we may as a committee want to horse trade on purpose. Maybe we're 10,000 short on furniture and fixtures for something like this idea. And landscape, we could save $10,000 for the time being. It's up above in site work, but we could save that. We could finish out the landscaping in year 2. And I think that's the type of horse trading that we should be prepared to do as a committee to keep meeting the objectives of the project. You agree with me, Mary?
Okay.
Oh, you
All
are?
right. Are there any other discussions on the dining space?
It doesn't really matter at this point whether I agree. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood the importance of this function and what it means not to have dedicated space for it. Obviously we have to accept that we're not going to have dedicated space for it. But I don't think I would be doing my job if I didn't represent what people have told me is a very big need.
I was going back to a different point. I respect that. I was going back to a different point about your concern about maintaining the sanctity of line items. You gave the example of furniture and fixtures. I'm just saying, there will be times where we do that. We'll do that with malice or forethought. We know that it advances the whole agenda, but that would be, like Ken said, that would be a building committee decision.
I understand the point you're making, Alan, and I just can't comment on it, before we're even in that situation.
Okay. Any other comments about the dining space? Okay, and then the last thing, we're going to talk about office space. That's a request from you, Mary, so go ahead.
Well, the new offices are significantly smaller than the current offices, and this is for all staff members. And they're smaller to such a large extent that certain things like copiers and supplies and files are going to have to be stored in the 4th office. So we have an office for the nurse, an office for the director, an office for the assistant director. They're each very small. If the senior center, if we are building this center to accommodate the growth that we see happening in our senior population in the two towns, we are eventually going to need a third staff person, and we will have no place to put that staff person because what would have been their office is taken up with storage and as a copy and file room. So even with smaller office furniture, and I've had some experience designing offices, so I do know what's available. The ability to conduct business the way they're used to doing it and the way they need to do it, and this is for all staff, not just the director, is going to be compromised. And the example that I sent to everyone as a point of information, not to initiate discussion, which would have been a violation of FOI, but I did not violate it. The example with the director's office is the consultation that she constantly gives to families in need of being connected with resources when they have a family member who's recovering from an operation or an illness, and whatever the circumstances are, our director can put them in touch with resources, but this needs to be done privately behind a closed door. And if you can't fit more than one or two people in your office, you can't offer this anymore, and you need to find another space for it. So I do think these offices are extremely small. I tried to bring this up starting maybe 8 months ago, each time I was put off, and my comments were not allowed to be expressed. But I'm expressing them now, even though it's too late to do anything about them. But this is why, not just for this director, but for all personnel coming after her, this office space is going to be inadequate, and it's going to hamper the way the staff perform their duties. So this is the other major reason why I don't consider the current building plan as meeting needs. And I tried to express this many months ago when it was still possible to do something about it, but I was not allowed to be heard on the topic. So I'm expressing it now. I'm not expecting anything, but it needs to be on the record.
Okay. Anybody want to chime in?
I would solicit from anybody who's doing construction now that, you know, the comments that offices are too large or too small. My experience is if you go back 30 years, all these offices would have been way too small unless all 4 of them were one office. And in modern times, when people dedicate dollars to a project, they dedicate them to the functions and not to the administrative functions of the project. And there's a limited shell that you can deal with. And I think that it's not at all unusual to design office space in a way that tries to minimize individual office space and maximize public space. And that's what I think this design does. It's a balance. And maybe sometimes some conversation needs to take place in the quiet room, as an example. So it will take place in the quiet room, but I would hope that if somebody walked into this building now and saw these floor plans and saw that the towns were going to put $5.4 million into this and build these multifunction rooms and all these spaces, that on balance, it would feel like a good plan. I just think that enlarging office spaces is not the best use of the taxpayers' money. I think the best use is in everything else that we've done in this space. And I understand that one is larger than the other or smaller than the other when measured side by side. But I think dollars have gone to the right functions. And this has come up in the meeting before. It was not silenced. We talked about it. And I said, look, I have done this like, I don't know the right number, 20,000 times, for the corporation I work for. When you do this, lots of people tell you this won't work. People are very used to what they do and they tell you it won't work, but it works. And for the pieces that don't work, the existing thing doesn't work 100% of the time, all the time. Everything's a trade-off. And I think that we should be embracing the new and the expansion and the public spaces and recognize that, I won't say a percentage, but the work is out there. The work's out there. The work is in the corner in the office. The work is out there with our visitors and members and programs.
Yeah, and to that end, also at our board of directors meeting, one of our members also expressed that she was a person who had to deal with a change in her office and it was made smaller. But because she had better furniture design, better filing system, those things that made the office more efficient, and it said over time, it was just fine. And she asked the question that I have subsequently asked point one to consider, and that is to provide Stephanie with a furniture plan so she can actually see what her space will look like, possibly with the new design. So that should be forthcoming.
You know what? I did a bunch of this, and we would take people to other facilities who recently done the transformation that our company was about to do, so that they could actually just walk through the space. And yes, there's smaller offices. Sometimes they saw smaller cubicles, but they also saw bigger drop-down spaces and bigger meeting spaces. They saw a lot more light coming in. Little things like the floor that we talked about. This is all getting fixed. And on balance, these were happy people. And you could always find an unhappy person or two. But on balance, these were really happy people that felt proud that that kind of money got invested in the place where they live and work every day. And Stephanie herself, I mean, that space is her space, and the whole rest of that facility, $5.4 million strong, is also her space. All that money is being invested in this building.
So let me weigh into, the rule of thumb generally for an executive office with 2 chairs and a desk and a credenza is about 120 square feet. That's the rule we have. As Alan, you pointed out, they have trended smaller because paper is going away. I mean, obviously we still have things, but so much is put on the cloud and storage. People don't have to file everything. So we don't have big credenzas in offices anymore, lateral filing systems. Those generally are relegated to back rooms because they're rarely used or rarely accessed. So most offices, they don't keep that kind of stuff in the personal office anymore. Also for security reasons, the less paper that's out and available, the better. Offices tend to trend up to 150 square feet when you want to have a side table, meeting table in the room as well for separate meetings. But you only see those generally in the higher executive rooms. Usually if you need to take a meeting within multiple people, you tend to go to a smaller room or one of the rooms that's available and just hold the meeting in there for those times. But if you're doing that if you're doing that regularly, then that makes sense. But I didn't get the sense that's the primary role. Stephanie's not primarily meeting with people all the time in their office every
More
hour
than two, or more than 2 people.
Yeah, so 2 people, you can get two chairs and a desk two guest chairs plus a desk, plus a back return credenza, pretty easily at 120 square feet. And that's generally the rule of thumb we see in those. So,
And Russell, when you apply your rule of thumb, is there any provision for files or for storage of equipment in that?
yeah, that's what I was saying. I mean, generally you don't, I mean, obviously you can have a credenza with some basic files and such, but people shouldn't be storing all their files in that office. Especially with cloud-based filing and electronic documents.
Yeah.
We're seeing that stuff happen in remote. I mean, our office, anything that's paper that's not needed on the meeting goes off site. We don't even have it on site anymore. We don't have it even in the building.
And
Because
I
everything is in
I
PDF
don't want
mode.
to, sorry, I don't want to speak for Stephanie's filing needs, but she can speak to what her needs are and what her assistant's needs are.
And I can also speak to this, Mary, when this first came up a while back, my concern was with the storage of paper. You know, when we actually go to construction, we're going to have to clean out the building. It's an opportunity to downsize or clean out or get rid of what you don't need or you don't have to keep. And I was directed to the State of Connecticut Library System and the archivist for public records to find out exactly what has to be kept as a senior center for paper. There is no regulation for senior centers other than what was suggested that might be litigious or mandated by her employer. Okay, so I see this as an opportunity for all of us who are frequenting that center and using the facilities to take a look at what we really need, what we really don't need, and how it actually can make our lives a lot easier down the road, especially with technology and with the ability to digitize records at this point. But then again, it's a conversation that we're going to have with Steph down the road. Right now, it's not going to happen because, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg and Kelsey, the only way we could make Stephanie's office larger right now is to get rid of one of the offices in the plan.
Yeah, we don't have other than add on to the building that already exists down in that corner. That's the only solution. You get rid of one office, you have 3 instead of 4. That would make one larger office. Again, that's the corner, that's the existing craft room down there. So we were not adding anything to the north as an addition, and I think that's just going to add more cost to the project. So listen, we're happy to work with Stephanie to come up with a furniture layout that suits her needs. And, you know, we can show a furniture layout, you know, and have a meeting with her, however you would like us to engage. You know,
And we've already also added in a closet, a dedicated closet that she requested, that you requested for AV equipment with plugs. That would be the storage facility for some of the things that are actually in your office right now.
correct.
Yeah, I would really welcome that because I've been working on what I need in the office. Unfortunately, although the state might not require a lot of files, I do have a lot of files and they are pertinent. They are stuff that I use all the time, so they would need to remain in my office. But I have an idea, so I would really look forward to that, Greg, if we could meet and kind of get the ideas of what I do need and how we can fit it into that office. I would very much like that conversation.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I like to see that too. I like to see that if this is escalating to this level of concern by one of our committee members, I think that knowing that we had a good handle on the files that are there, on the volume of the files that are there, the types of equipment, that everything has a home. But I would look for flexible, efficient, cost efficient And the model that we're trying to set is about those things, electronic storage, breaking paradigms of things that have to be here and can't be someplace else. So that what we end up with is the best bang for the buck on the dollar. So I think convincing people that we need larger offices instead of smaller offices because we happen to be in the unique position that our operation has files and nobody else does. I mean, it really doesn't make sense with the trend that has been happening in office design for 25 years now. It's just, it's difficult sometimes to imagine. It's hard to implement. You mentioned the cleaning days, the projects I'm familiar with. Cleaning days were like 2 weeks long, and all this shredding bins were out for people who were hanging on to stuff that wasn't needed. And we were paying whatever the going rate is for facility costs per square foot. And it wasn't for our favorite vice president or our favorite director or our favorite salesperson. It was for our favorite filing cabinet. It's not a good use of money. And so it's a good time to make all those things. But it does start in my mind with point one, helping us make that inventory, make that assessment, make sure we didn't miss something, that there isn't a gotcha here or an aha that we don't know how to make this work. It should show us that the plan comes together.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, I hope, Mary, that answered some of your questions. Okay. If there is no other comment or question about those two items, dining room or office space, please speak up or forever hold your peace just for tonight. And we have no members of the public. All right. Can I have a motion for adjournment, please? Somebody move
I'll do
to
it.
adjourn.
So
Alan.
moved.
Okay. Second,
I
please.
wanted Alan to get one at least.
Thank you for that chance.
Who's seconding, please?
I'll second.
All right, Russell. All right. We don't have further discussion. We are adjourned.
Okay.
Alan, you can stop recording at 8:19.